I only defended myself. 2-year-old girl is sentenced to death for killing her stepfather. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. It was a Tuesday morning when America woke up to the unthinkable. A 2-year-old child, barely able to speak in full sentences, was being formally charged with murder. The courthouse steps in Millbrook, a quiet town in rural Pennsylvania, looked like a war zone. News vans lined every corner. Cameras flashed like lightning. Protesters screamed from both sides, some holding signs that read "Justice" for Brian, others demanding "Protect the innocent." And in the middle of it all, a tiny figure in a pink jacket was being escorted through the chaos by 2 officers. Her name was Emma Calloway. She didn't understand what was happening. She clutched a stuffed rabbit in her small hands, her wide eyes scanning the crowd as if searching for her mother. But her mother wasn't there. Not yet. Standing on the opposite side of the street, behind the police barricade, was a woman with a camera. Her name was Diane Mercer, an independent documentarian who had spent the last decade chasing stories no one else wanted to touch. Stories about broken systems, about people who fell through the cracks. But this was different. Diane had been following the case since the arrest 2 weeks prior. The details were sparse, contradictory, and frankly, impossible. A toddler accused of killing her. Stepfather. No weapon found. No clear motive. Just a dead man, a blood-stained living room, and a child who couldn't even explain what happened. The official story, as told by District Attorney Marcus Holden, was chillingly simple. Emma had been left alone with her stepfather, Brian Lawson, for less than an hour. When her mother, Claire Calloway, returned home from the grocery store, she found Brian dead on the floor, a kitchen knife beside him, and Emma standing nearby, covered in blood. The prosecution claimed Emma had stabbed him, repeatedly. It didn't matter that she weighed barely 30 pounds. It didn't matter that the knife was almost as long as her forearm. It didn't matter that no one could explain how a 2-year-old could overpower a grown man. The narrative had already been written, and the nation was watching. Diane zoomed in with her camera as Emma was carried up the courthouse steps. The little girl's face was blank, almost eerily calm. The crowd roared louder. Someone threw something. Diane couldn't tell what, and it splattered against the courthouse wall. Inside, the courtroom was packed. Diane slipped in just before the doors closed. She found a spot in the back, her camera resting on her lap, her heart pounding in her chest. Judge Margaret Hale entered, her expression unreadable. The room fell silent. All rise. Emma was placed in a chair far too big for her. Her feet didn't touch the ground. The stuffed rabbit was taken from her hands by a bailiff, and for the first time she began to cry. D.A. Holden stood, adjusting his tie. He was a tall man, early 50s, with silver hair and a voice that commanded attention. He had won every major case in the county for the past decade. This one, Diane knew, was his ticket to the state senate. "Your Honor," Holden began, his voice steady and cold, "the evidence in this case is clear. On the evening of September 14th, Brian Lawson was brutally murdered in his own home. The only other person present was the defendant. We have forensic evidence, we have blood patterns, we have the weapon, and we have a confession." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Diane's grip tightened on her camera. A confession? From a 2-year-old? Holden continued. The defendant was recorded on a police body camera saying, and I quote, "I did it." The courtroom erupted. Reporters frantically typed. Emma's court-appointed attorney, a young man named Paul Garrett, looked like he'd been punched in the gut. Judge Hale banged her gavel. "Order!" Diane sat frozen, her mind racing. Something was wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. She had watched that body camera footage a dozen times. She had heard Emma's voice, small and trembling, repeating words she clearly didn't understand, words that had been fed to her. But no one was asking that question. No one except Diane. As the hearing continued, Diane's eyes drifted to the back of the room. A woman sat alone in the last row, head bowed, hands folded in. Her lap. Claire Calloway, Emma's mother. She hadn't spoken to the press, hadn't made a statement, hadn't even tried to see her daughter since the arrest. Diane studied her carefully. Claire's face was pale, her eyes hollow. She looked like someone carrying a secret too heavy to bear, and then just... For a moment, Claire looked up. Her eyes met Diane's, and in that brief, silent exchange, Diane saw something that made her blood run cold. Fear, not grief, not anger. Fear. The kind of fear that comes from knowing the truth, and knowing it could destroy you. Brian Lawson had been dead for 17 days. To the people of Millbrook, he was a hero, a volunteer firefighter, a little league coach, a man who'd taken in a struggling single mother and her daughter, offering them a home when they had nowhere else to go. The local paper ran his photo on the front page for 3 straight days. In every picture, Brian was smiling. Strong jaw, kind eyes, the kind of face you'd trust with your life. But Diane had learned a long time ago that photographs lie. She sat in a cramped motel room on the edge of town, her laptop open, files scattered across the bed. She'd been digging into Brian's past for the last 48 hours, and what she found didn't match the saint the media was selling. Brian Lawson had been married before, twice. Both marriages ended in restraining orders. The second wife, a woman named Jessica Pruitt, had filed a police report claiming Brian had threatened her with a weapon during an argument. The case was dropped after she suddenly moved out of state. Diane made a note to track her down. Then there was the employment history. Brian had worked for the Millbrook Fire Department for 6 years, but 2 years ago, he'd been quietly reassigned to administrative duties, no official reason given. Just a note in his file that mentioned internal review. Diane leaned back, rubbing her eyes. This wasn't the man D.A. Holden was presenting to the jury. This was someone else entirely. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Stop digging. You don't know what you're getting into. Diane stared at the screen. She'd been threatened before. It came with the job. But this felt different, colder. She deleted the message and kept working. The next morning, Diane attended the second hearing. This time, the courtroom was even more packed. Cable news had picked up the story. Toddler on trial was the headline splashed across every network. D.A. Holden stood at the prosecutor's table, looking every bit the confident leader. Beside him sat his assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Vanessa Kern, who handled the media like a professional. Campaign manager. On the defense side, Paul Garrett sat alone, flipping through a stack of papers with the frantic energy of someone drowning. Emma wasn't in the courtroom this time. Judge Hale had ruled that she would appear via video link to avoid further trauma. A small mercy. Claire Calloway, however, was there. Same seat, same hollow expression. Diane slipped into the row behind her. Mrs. Calloway, Diane said quietly, leaning forward. My name is Diane Mercer. I'm a documentarian. I'd like to talk to you about Emma. Claire didn't turn around. Her voice was barely a whisper. I have nothing to say. I'm not trying to hurt you, Diane continued. I just want to understand what really happened that night. Claire's hands trembled in her lap. You don't understand anything. Then help me. For a long moment, Claire said nothing. Then, without looking back, she spoke again, her voice strained and distant. He was a good man, everyone says so, so it must be true. It wasn't an answer. It was a script. Before Diane could press further, the bailiff called the room to order. Judge Hale entered, and the hearing began. Holden stood to present his opening evidence. He moved with the precision of a man who'd already won. Your Honor, the state will demonstrate through forensic analysis, witness testimony, and the defendant's own words that this was not an accident. This was an act of violence, and the person responsible must be held accountable, regardless of age. Paul. Garrett rose to object, but his voice lacked conviction. Your Honor, the defense maintains that a child of 2 years old cannot form the intent necessary for a murder charge. This is a tragic accident being weaponized for... Save it for trial, Mr. Garrett, Judge Hale interrupted. We're here to Determine if there's enough evidence to proceed. Proceed, Mr. Holden. Holden nodded and called his first witness, Detective Raymond Cole. Cole was in his late 40s, stocky, with a face worn down by years on the job. He took the stand with the confidence of a man who'd testified 100 times before. Holden asked him to walk through the crime scene. When we arrived at the Calloway residence on the evening of September 14th, Cole began, we found the victim, Brian Lawson, unresponsive on the living room floor. He had sustained multiple stab wounds to the torso. The murder weapon, a kitchen knife, was found approximately 3 feet from the body. And where was the defendant? Standing near the couch, covered in blood, she was holding a stuffed animal. Did she say anything? Cole hesitated, just for a second, but Diane caught it. Yes. When Officer Mills approached her and asked what happened, she said, I did it. The courtroom murmured. Diane's jaw tightened. Detective Cole, Holden continued, in your professional opinion, was there anyone else in the house at the time of the murder? No, sir. The mother, Claire Calloway, was out shopping. We confirmed her alibi. Through store receipts and security footage, she wasn't home. So the only person who could have killed Brian Lawson was Emma Calloway. Objection, Garrett said weakly. Speculation. Sustained, Judge Hale said. Rephrase, Mr. Holden. But the damage was done. The jury of public opinion had already made up its mind. As the hearing wrapped up, Diane noticed something strange. Claire hadn't reacted. Not once. Not when they described the blood. Not when they mentioned Emma's so-called confession. She just sat there, staring at her hands. Diane's instincts screamed, this woman knows something. After the hearing adjourned, Diane followed Claire into the hallway. She was about to call out to her when a man in a dark suit intercepted Claire first. He was tall, silver-haired, mid-60s. Diane didn't recognize him, but Claire clearly did. She flinched as he leaned in close and whispered something Diane couldn't hear. Claire nodded, her face drained of color, and walked away without a word. The man turned and locked eyes with Diane. He smiled. It was the kind of smile that said, I know you're watching, and I don't care. Diane felt a chill run down her spine. She pulled her phone and snapped a photo of him as he disappeared into the crowd. Later that night, back in her motel room, Diane ran the image through every database she had access to. It took 20 minutes. When the result came back, her stomach dropped. Senator Gerald Whitmore, Pennsylvania State Legislature, chair of the Judicial Oversight Committee. And according to public records, he'd been a close friend of Brian Lawson. Claire Calloway lived in a small rental house on the outskirts of Millbrook, the kind of place you ended up in when life had beaten you down one too many times. Diane. Parked across the street just after sunset. The lights were on inside, but the curtains were drawn. She'd been sitting there for 20 minutes, debating whether to knock on the door or wait for Claire to come out. She decided to wait. At 8:47 p.m., the front door opened. Claire stepped out, wrapped in a thin cardigan, a trash bag in her hand. She walked to the curb, tossed the bag into the bin, and paused. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at nothing. Diane got out of the car. Mrs. Calloway. Claire spun around, startled. Her face went pale when she recognized Diane. I told you I have nothing to say. I know, Diane said gently, but I think you want to. Claire's eyes darted toward the house, then back to Diane. She looked like a trapped animal. You don't understand what you're asking me to do. Then help me understand. Claire's lips trembled. She glanced at the house. Again, as if afraid someone might be watching from inside. I can't, she whispered. If I say anything, they'll take everything from me. They've already taken Emma. Claire flinched like she'd been slapped. Diane took a step closer. You know she didn't do this. You know it wasn't her, Claire's breath hitched. For a moment, Diane thought she might break. But then Claire shook her head, her expression hardening. Emma said she did it. The police have it on video. What more do you need? I need the truth. Claire's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed cold. The truth doesn't matter. Not anymore. She turned and walked back into the house, shutting the door behind her. Diane stood there, her mind racing. The truth doesn't matter. Those weren't the words of a mother fighting for her child. Those were the words of someone who'd already given up, or been forced to. The next morning, Diane went through the evidence files she'd managed to obtain through a contact in the public defender's office. Most of it was standard. Crime scene photos, witness statements, forensic reports. But buried in the middle of the stack was something odd. A transcript of the 911 call made the night Brian died. Diane had heard about the call in passing, but it had never been played in court. She assumed it was Claire calling for help after finding Brian's body. She was wrong. The call had been made at 6:43 p.m., before Claire supposedly came home. Diane's heart raced as she read the transcript. Dispatcher, 911, what's your emergency? Caller, child's voice, unclear. He's sleeping. Dispatcher, who's sleeping, sweetie? Can you tell me your name? Caller, crying. Emma. Dispatcher, okay, Emma. Where's your mommy? Caller, gone. Dispatcher, and who's sleeping? Caller. Long pause. Brian, he won't wake up. The call had lasted 90 seconds. The dispatcher had tried to keep Emma on the line, but the child had hung up. Police were dispatched immediately. They arrived at 6:58 p.m., 15 minutes before Claire's car pulled into the driveway. Diane read the transcript again, her mind spinning. If Emma had called 911, that meant she was alone with Brian's body for at least 15 minutes before her mother came home. But more importantly, Emma hadn't said, "I did it," on that call. She'd said Brian wouldn't wake up. That was the voice of a confused, terrified child, not a confession. So why had Detective Cole's testimony made it sound like Emma had admitted guilt the moment the police arrived? Diane grabbed her phone and dialed Paul Garrett, Emma's defense attorney. He answered on the third ring, sounding exhausted. "This is Paul." "Mr. Garrett, it's Diane Mercer. We met briefly at the courthouse. I need to ask you something. I can't discuss the case with—" "Did you listen to the 911 call?" Silence. "Mr. Garrett?" He sighed. "Yes, I listened to it." "Then why wasn't it presented in court?" Another pause, longer this time. "Because the prosecution argued it was irrelevant." Judge Hale agreed. She said it didn't speak to Emma's state of mind at the time of the incident, only after. "That's insane." "That's the system," Paul said bitterly. "Look, I'm doing everything I can, but my hands are tied. Holden has the media. He has the narrative, and he has a confession, even if it's from a 2-year-old who barely understands what the word did means." "What about Claire? Have you spoken to her?" "She's uncooperative. Won't answer my questions. Won't give me anything I can use. It's like she's—" He trailed off. "Like, she's scared," Diane finished. "Yeah," Paul admitted quietly. "Like she's terrified." That afternoon, Diane returned to the Calloway house. This time, she didn't knock. She walked around the side of the property, where a chain-link fence separated the yard from the neighbor's lot. The backyard was small and overgrown. A rusted swing set sat in the corner, one of the swings missing. A plastic slide had tipped over in the grass. Diane moved carefully, her camera in hand, documenting everything. And then she saw it. Tucked beneath the back porch, half buried in the dirt, was a small pink shoe. Child's shoe. Diane crouched down and pulled it free. It was covered in mud, but the sole was still intact. On the inside, written in faded marker, was a name. Emma. Diane's breath caught. This wasn't just a lost shoe. This was something that had been hidden. She turned it over in her hands. Her mind racing. Why would a child's shoe be buried under the porch? She stood, her eyes scanning the rest of the yard. And then she noticed something else. Near the back door there was a small window, low to the ground, the kind that led to a crawl space or basement. The glass was cracked. Diane knelt beside it and peered inside. It was dark, but she could make out shapes. Boxes, old furniture, and something else. A stuffed rabbit. The same one Emma had been holding in court. But that didn't make sense. The rabbit had been taken as evidence. Diane had seen it logged in the police report, so how was there another one down here? Diane pulled out her phone and took a photo through the cracked glass. Then she heard a voice behind her. "You shouldn't be here." Diane spun around. Claire stood at the edge of the yard, her arms crossed, her face pale and drawn. "Mrs. Calloway, I said you shouldn't be here." Diane held up the shoe. "Why was this buried under your porch?" Claire's eyes widened. For a split second, her composure cracked. "Where did you—" She stopped herself, her jaw tightening. "Give that to me." "Not until you tell me what's going on." Claire's hands shook. She looked like she might collapse. "You don't understand," she whispered. If I say anything, they'll kill me." Diane's blood ran cold. "Who, Claire? Who will kill you?" Claire's eyes filled with tears. She opened her mouth to speak, and then a car pulled into the driveway, a black sedan, tinted windows. Claire's face went white. "You need to leave, now. Claire, now." The car door opened. A man stepped out, tall, expensive suit. Diane recognized him immediately. Senator Gerald Whitmore. He looked directly at Diane, his expression calm and cold. "Ms. Mercer," he said smoothly, "I don't believe we've been formally introduced." Senator Gerald Whitmore didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You're trespassing," he said calmly, adjusting his cufflinks. "I could have you arrested." Diane stayed where she was, the pink shoe still in her hand. "I'm a journalist. I'm investigating a case." "No," Whitmore corrected, his smile razor thin. "You're harassing a grieving family. There's a difference." Claire stood frozen between them, her face drained of all color. "Mrs. Calloway doesn't want you here," Whitmore continued. "Isn't that right, Claire?" Claire nodded stiffly, unable to meet Diane's eyes. Diane looked at her for a long moment, then back at Whitmore. "What's your connection to this case, Senator?" Whitmore's smile widened. "Brian Lawson was a friend, a good man. I'm here to make sure his memory is honored, and to ensure justice is served." "Justice for who?" "For Brian, and for the community he protected." "What about Emma?" Whitmore's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes, something cold. "That child is a tragedy," he said quietly. "But tragedies don't erase accountability." Diane's stomach turned. "She's 2 years old. And the law applies to everyone, Ms. Mercer, even children." He took a step closer, his voice dropping. "I'd advise you to be very careful about the stories you choose to tell. Millbrook is a small town. People talk, and sometimes people get hurt." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Diane held his gaze. "I'm not afraid of you. You should be." Whitmore turned to Claire. "Let's go inside. We have things to discuss." Claire nodded and followed him toward the house without a word. Diane watched them disappear through the front door. Her hands were shaking. That night, Diane sat in her motel room, replaying the encounter in her mind. She'd been threatened before, by criminals, by corrupt officials, by people who had everything to lose. But this felt different. Whitmore wasn't just protecting a friend's reputation. He was orchestrating something, and Claire was caught in the middle of it. Diane opened her laptop and pulled up everything she could find on Gerald Whitmore. State senator for 12 years, chair of the Judicial Oversight Committee, previously served as district attorney in a neighboring county. Spotless record, impeccable reputation. But Diane had learned long ago that the cleanest records belong to the dirtiest people. She dug deeper, and then she found it. A news article from 7 years ago. Small publication, barely a blip. Former DA Whitmore faces ethics inquiry over dismissed case. The article was vague, but it mentioned allegations of evidence. Suppression in a domestic violence case. The inquiry had been dropped after the complainant, the victim, suddenly recanted her statement and moved out of state. Diane's pulse quickened. She cross-referenced the date with Brian Lawson's employment records. Brian had been working in the same county. The time, as a paramedic before he became a firefighter. It could be a coincidence. But Diane didn't believe in coincidences. The next morning, she received a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer. "Hello? Ms. Mercer?" The voice was male, nervous. "My name is Todd Brennan. I'm reporter with the Millbrook Gazette. I heard you've been asking questions about the Calloway case." "I have. I think we should meet." "Why?" Todd hesitated. "Because I tried asking those same questions 2 weeks ago, and my editor killed the story." Diane sat up. "Why?" "I don't know. But I think you do." They agreed to meet at a diner on the edge of town. Todd Brennan was younger than Diane expected. Mid-20s, wire-rimmed glasses, the eager look of someone who still believed journalism could change the world. He slid into the booth across from her, a folder tucked under his arm. "Thanks for meeting me," he said. "What do you have?" Todd opened the folder and pulled out a printed email. "This is from my editor, Richard Cass. He's been with the Gazette for 30 years. Never killed a story in his life. Until this one." Diane scanned the email. "Drop the Calloway piece. Effective immediately. No further questions." "Did he say why?" Diane asked. "No, but the next day the Gazette received a $50,000 donation from an anonymous donor. Biggest contribution we've had in a decade." Diane's jaw tightened. "Someone bought your silence." Todd nodded. "And I think I know." "Who?" He pulled out another document. A list of campaign donors for Senator Whitmore's re-election fund. Near the top of the list, Millbrook Gazette, $10,000. "That donation came 2 days after Brian Lawson died," Todd said quietly. Diane stared at the paper, her mind racing. Whitmore wasn't just protecting his friend's reputation. He was controlling the narrative. "There's more," Todd said. He pulled out a printed screenshot of a social media post. This was uploaded the day after the arrest. It went viral, over 2 million views. Diane looked at the image. It was a photo of Emma being escorted into the courthouse, her face blurred but her tiny frame unmistakable. The caption read, "Monster in Pink, the toddler who killed." The account belonged to a popular true crime podcaster named Vanessa Thorne. Diane recognized the name immediately. Vanessa Thorne was everywhere. Podcasts, YouTube, cable news. She'd built an empire on sensationalized crime stories, turning tragedy into entertainment. "She's been covering the case nonstop," Todd said. "Every episode, she calls Emma a calculated killer. She's got millions of listeners. And she's poisoning the jury pool before the trial even starts," Diane muttered. Todd nodded grimly. "The worst part? Vanessa's show is sponsored by Whitmore's re-election campaign." Diane felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't just a murder case. It was a carefully constructed machine. Media, money, power. And at the center of it all, a terrified 2-year-old who couldn't defend herself. Diane spent the next 2 days tracking down Brian Lawson's ex-wife, Jessica Pruitt. It wasn't easy. Jessica had scrubbed her online presence clean. No social media, no forwarding address, just a ghost. But Diane had dealt with ghosts before. She found Jessica working at a bookstore in a small town 3 hours north of Millbrook. Diane drove through the night. The bookstore was quiet, tucked between a coffee shop and a laundromat. Jessica was behind the counter, mid-30s, blonde hair pulled back, tired eyes that had seen too much. Diane approached carefully. "Jessica Pruitt?" Jessica looked up. Her face went pale. "I don't talk to reporters." "I'm not here to hurt you," Diane said gently. "I'm investigating Brian Lawson's death." Jessica's hands froze on the book she was holding. "He's dead." Diane nodded. 2 weeks ago, stabbed. In his home. Jessica stared at her, processing. Then quietly, "Good." Diane pulled out her phone. "Can I ask you a few questions?" Jessica hesitated, then glanced around the empty store. 5 minutes. That's all you get. They sat in the back corner. Jessica's hands trembled as she spoke. Brian was charming at first. Everyone loved him. But behind closed door, she trailed off, her jaw tightening. He had a temper, a bad one. Did he hurt you? Jessica nodded. More than once. The last time he held a knife to my throat and told me if I ever left him, he'd find me. You filed a restraining order. And then I dropped it, because his friends convinced me it would ruin his career, that I was overreacting. Jessica's voice cracked. So I ran instead. Diane leaned forward. Did you ever meet Claire Calloway? Jessica shook her head. But I heard he was seeing someone, a woman, with a kid. Her eyes filled with fear. Is the kid okay? Diane hesitated. She's alive, but she's been charged with killing him. Jessica's face went white. No, she whispered. No, that's not. She's just a baby. I know. Jessica covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. He did this. Even dead, he's still destroying lives. Diane pulled out her phone and played the audio from the night Brian died. The recording was faint, muffled, but clear enough. A man's voice, shouting, then a crash, then silence. Jessica listened, her face pale. Where did you get this? A neighbor recorded it on their phone. They were too scared to come forward. Jessica closed her eyes. That's him, she whispered. That's Brian. The preliminary hearing was set for Monday morning. Diane arrived early, camera in hand, and positioned herself near the back entrance where attorneys and staff filtered in. Before the press could swarm them, she spotted Paul Garrett stepping out of his car, a battered briefcase in one hand, coffee in the other. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Mr. Garrett. He stopped, recognizing her. Ms. Mercer, I can't talk to you. I'm not asking you to break privilege. I just want to know, are you okay? Paul blinked, caught off guard by the question. No, he admitted quietly. I'm not. Diane stepped closer. What's stopping you from fighting this? Paul glanced around, making sure no one was listening. You want the truth? His voice dropped. I've been told to take a deal, plead her out. Manslaughter, psychiatric facility until she's 18. Diane's stomach dropped. She's 2 years old. I know. Paul's jaw tightened. But if I push for trial, I'll lose. Holden has the media. He has the narrative. And he has a judge who won't let me present half my evidence. Like the 911 call? Paul froze. How do you? Because I actually listened to it, Diane said. Emma didn't confess. She was scared and confused. It doesn't matter, Paul said bitterly. Judge Hale ruled it inadmissible. So did the recording from the neighbor. So did Jessica Pruitt's restraining order. Everything that could help Emma has been buried. Diane's blood ran cold. Who's burying it? Paul looked at her for a long moment. You already know. He walked away before she could respond. Inside the courtroom, D.A. Holden sat at the prosecutor's table, perfectly composed. Beside him, his assistant, Vanessa Kern, whispered something in his ear. He nodded, smiling. Diane watched them carefully. This wasn't about justice. It was about winning. Judge Hale entered. The room stood. And then, on the screen at the front of the courtroom, Emma's face appeared via video link. She looked smaller than before, paler. Her eyes were glassy, distant. Diane's chest tightened. Holden stood. Your Honor, the state has obtained new evidence. A forensic analysis of the defendant's clothing shows blood spatter consistent with close-range violence. Paul shot to his feet. Objection. That analysis was never shared with the defense. It was submitted this morning, Holden said smoothly. This morning? Paul's voice rose. Your Honor, I haven't had time to review. Then review it during recess, Judge Hale said coldly. Objection overruled. Paul sat down, defeated. Diane clenched her fists. The system wasn't broken, it was rigged. And Emma didn't stand a chance. After the hearing, Diane returned to her motel room and spread out everything she had. Crime scene photos, transcripts, witness statements. And then she found it, buried in a police report, a single line. Neighbor Ada Finch called station at 7:02 p.m., advised she heard shouting earlier, but did not wish to provide statement. Ada Finch had never been interviewed, never called to testify. Her name appeared once, then vanished. Diane pulled up property records and found her address, 2 houses down, from the Calloway residence. She grabbed her jacket and left. Ada Finch lived in a narrow brick house with overgrown hedges and a mailbox hanging crooked. Diane knocked 3 times before the door cracked open. An elderly woman peered out, her face lined with age and suspicion. "I'm not buying anything. I'm not selling," Diane said gently. "My name is Diane Mercer. I'm looking into what happened to Brian Lawson." Ada's expression darkened. "I already told the police I don't want to be involved." "I know. But I think you saw something that night. Something important." Ada hesitated, her hand gripping the doorframe. "If I talk, they'll come after me." "Who?" Ada glanced over Diane's shoulder, as if expecting someone to be watching. "The people who don't want the truth to come out." Diane's pulse quickened. "Please, a little girl's life is at stake." Ada's face softened. She looked down, conflicted. Finally, she opened the door. 5 minutes, that's all. Inside, the house smelled like old wood and lavender. Ada led Diane to a small kitchen table and sat down heavily. "I heard them fighting that night," Ada said quietly. "Brian and Claire. It wasn't the first time." "What were they fighting about?" "I don't know, but it was loud, violent. I heard something break, then I heard him scream at her." Ada's voice faltered. "He said if she ever tried to leave, he'd make sure she lost Emma." Diane's breath caught. "Then what happened?" "It went quiet for a while, then I heard the little one crying. Emma, she was screaming for her mama." Ada's hands trembled. "I should have called the police right then, but I was afraid. Brian had friends everywhere. Important friends. Like Senator Whitmore?" Ada's eyes widened. "You know about him?" Diane nodded. Ada exhaled. Slowly. "Whitmore used to come by the house late at night. I saw his car more than once." "Did you tell the police?" "I tried." Ada's voice cracked. "But the detective who came to my door told me I must have been mistaken, that I was old and confused. Then he said if I kept talking, I'd be charged with filing a false report." Diane's stomach turned. "Who was the detective?" "Cole, Raymond Cole. The same detective who testified that Emma confessed." Ada leaned forward, her voice urgent. "That little girl didn't kill anyone. I don't care what they say. Brian was alive when Claire came home. I saw her pull into the driveway." Diane froze. "You saw Claire come home?" "Yes, around 7 she ran inside, and 5 minutes later the ambulance came." Diane's mind raced. If Claire came home at 7 and Brian was still alive, then Emma couldn't have killed him. "Miss Finch, would you be willing to testify to this?" Ada's face went pale. "I can't. If I do, they'll—" The front window shattered. Glass exploded across the room. Ada screamed. Diane dove to the floor, her heart pounding. When she looked up, a brick lay in the middle of the kitchen, a piece of paper wrapped around it. Diane crawled over and unfolded the note. 3 words written in block letters. "Stop asking questions." Diane stayed with Ada until the police arrived. Not that it mattered. The officer who responded took a statement, glanced at the broken window and said it was probably kids. He didn't even look at the note. Ada didn't argue. She just nodded, her hands still shaking. After he left, Diane helped her board up the window. "You should leave town for a while," Diane said quietly. Ada shook her head. "I've lived here 40 years. I'm not running." But her voice said otherwise. That night, Diane couldn't. Diane. Sleep. She kept thinking about Emma, about what this was doing to her. A 2-year-old child ripped from her mother, locked in a system that didn't care if she lived or died. A child who couldn't understand why everyone was angry at her, why her world had turned into a nightmare. Diane opened her laptop and pulled up a video she'd found buried in the case files. It was from Emma's first day in state custody. A social worker had recorded it for the court. Emma sat on the floor of a sterile white room clutching a stuffed rabbit. Not the one from the crime scene, a new one, generic, lifeless. The social worker sat across from her, trying to get her to talk. "Emma, can you tell me what happened at home?" Emma didn't answer. She just stared at the rabbit. "Emma, sweetie, I need you to talk to me." Still nothing. The social worker tried again. "Do you miss your mommy?" Emma looked up. Her eyes were hollow. "Mama's gone," she whispered. "She's not gone, honey, she's just... Mama's gone." Emma repeated, louder this time. Her voice cracked. "She left me." The social worker reached out, but Emma recoiled, clutching the rabbit tighter. "I want to go home." "I know, sweetie, but you can't." "Right now." "Why?" The social worker hesitated. Because you did something bad." Emma's face crumpled. She didn't cry. She just stared at the floor, her small body trembling. "I didn't mean to," she whispered. The video ended. Diane closed the laptop, her chest tight. Emma wasn't confessing. She was repeating what they'd told her, over and over until she believed it. The next morning, Diane drove to the facility where Emma was being held. She wasn't allowed inside, but she stood outside the fence, camera in hand, watching the small figures play in the yard. Emma was there, alone, sitting on a bench, the stuffed rabbit in her lap. She wasn't playing, wasn't talking to anyone. She just sat there, staring at the ground, a little girl who'd been erased. Diane raised her camera and recorded, not for the story, for the record, because someone needed to see this. Someone needed to remember that Emma Calloway wasn't a monster. She was a child, and she was drowning. Diane had a contact in the county clerk's office, a woman named Marla who owed her a favor from years back. She called in that favor. "I need access to sealed case files," Diane said over the phone. Marla sighed. "You're gonna get me fired. I'll protect you, I always do." A long pause, then, "What case?" "Brian Lawson and anything connected to Judge Margaret Hale or Senator Whitmore." Another pause, longer this time. "Meet me tonight, back entrance, 9 o'clock. The county building was empty. When Diane arrived, Marla let her in through a side door, her face pale and tight. "You've got 20 minutes, Marla whispered. "After that, I'm locking up and you were never here." Diane nodded and followed her down a narrow hallway into a records room lined with filing cabinets. Marla pulled out a keyring and unlocked a cabinet in the back corner. "This is everything flagged as restricted access," she said. "Good luck." She left Diane alone. Diane worked fast, pulling files and photographing pages with her phone. Most of it was mundane, civil disputes, probate cases, minor infractions, but then she found it. A file labeled Lawson vs. Calloway, custody dispute. Diane's heart raced as she opened it. Inside were documents showing that Brian Lawson had filed for full custody of Emma 6 weeks before his death. The petition claimed Claire was an unfit mother, neglectful, unstable, a danger to the child. There were photos attached, bruises on Emma's arms, a black eye. Diane's stomach turned, but something didn't add up. The photos were dated weeks apart, but the bruises looked identical. Same size, same placement. They'd been staged. She kept reading. Attached to the custody petition was a letter of support from Judge Margaret Hale, written before she was assigned to Emma's criminal case. Diane's blood ran cold. Hale had already taken Brian's side, months ago. And then she found the final piece. A financial disclosure form showing that Brian Lawson had received a $25,000 loan from Gerald Whitmore just 2 months before he died. The loan was marked as personal assistance. No repayment terms, no interest. Just a gift, from a senator to a man trying to take a child away from her mother. Diane photographed everything, her hands shaking. This wasn't just a murder case. It was a setup. Brian had been building a legal case to take Emma, and when Claire tried to fight back, someone made sure she couldn't. Diane's phone buzzed. A text from Marla. "Time's up. Get out. Now." Diane shoved the files back into the cabinet and bolted for the door. As she stepped outside into the cold night air, she saw headlights in the parking lot. A police cruiser. Her heart stopped. The cruiser pulled up beside her. The window rolled down. Detective Raymond Cole stared at her, his face hard. "Ms. Mercer," he said slowly, "you're out late. Just taking a walk." "In a restricted government building?" Diane didn't answer. Cole leaned back, his expression unreadable. "You're making a lot of people nervous." "Good." Cole's jaw tightened. "Be careful. People who ask too many questions around here tend to disappear." He rolled up the window and drove off. Diane stood there, her pulse hammering. She pulled out her phone and uploaded every photo to a secure cloud server. If something happened to her, the truth would still get out. Diane didn't go back to her motel that night. She drove 2 towns over and checked into a roadside inn under a fake name paying cash. She sat on the edge of the bed, laptop open, piecing together everything she'd found. Brian Lawson hadn't just been a violent man. He'd been a tool, a weapon wielded by people far more powerful than him. And when he became a liability, or when Claire finally fought back, someone made sure the narrative would bury her along with him. Diane stared at the photos on her screen, the custody petition, the loan from Whitmore, Judge Hale's letter of support. It was all there. But she needed more. She needed someone from the inside, someone who'd seen how this machine worked and couldn't live with it anymore. She thought of Detective Cole, the way he'd looked at her in the parking lot, not angry, guilty. The next morning, Diane tracked down Cole's address through public records. He lived in a modest ranch house on the outskirts of town, American flag hanging from the porch. She parked, crossed the street, and waited. At 9:15 a.m., Cole came out in jeans and a flannel shirt, coffee mug in hand. He saw her car immediately. For a moment, he just stood there. Then he walked over. Diane rolled down the window. "You've got guts, I'll give you that," Cole said. "I need to talk to you." "I've got nothing to say." "I think you do." Cole stared at her, his jaw working. Then he glanced back at his house as if checking to see if anyone was watching. "Not here," he said quietly. "Meet me at Riverside Park. 30 minutes. Riverside Park was nearly empty. A few joggers. A couple. Walking a dog. Cole sat on a bench overlooking the water, hands in his pockets. Diane sat beside him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Cole broke the silence. "I've been a cop for 23 years, he said quietly. "I've seen a lot of bad things, done a few myself, but shook his head. "This is the worst." "Then help me stop it." Cole laughed bitterly. "You think it's that simple? You think I can just walk into court and tell the truth? Why can't you?" "Because I've got a wife, 2 kids in college, a pension 6 years away." His voice cracked. "And because the people running this thing don't just ruin careers, they ruin lives." Diane leaned forward. "Emma's life is already ruined." Cole flinched. "I know," he whispered. "Then tell me what happened that night." Cole stared at the water for a long time. "When we got the 911 call, we thought it was a domestic. Happens all the time in that neighborhood. I was first on scene." He paused, his face tight. "Brian was on the floor, already dead. Emma was standing there covered in blood, just like I said, but what? She wasn't holding the knife. It was on the counter. Too high for her to reach." Diane's breath caught. And when I asked her what happened, she didn't say, "I did it." She said, "Mama did it." Diane's heart stopped. "What?" Cole's hands trembled. She said, "Mama did it." Clear as day. But my sergeant told me to change the report. Said a confession from the mother. Wouldn't stick because she had an alibi. But a confused kid saying random things, that could be shaped. Diane felt sick. "So you lied." "I followed orders," Cole said bitterly. "And I've been living with it ever since." "Why? Why would your sergeant want to frame a 2-year-old?" Cole looked at his eyes hollow. Because the real target was never Emma. It was Claire. They wanted her silenced. And the easiest way to do that was to take away the only thing she had left. Her daughter. Cole nodded. Diane's mind raced. Who gave the order? I don't know for sure, but the day after Brian died, Senator Whitmore came to the station. Spent 2 hours in the captain's office. When he left, everything changed. Evidence got buried. Witnesses stopped talking, and I got a call from my sergeant telling me exactly what to write in my report. And you just went along with it. Cole's voice broke. I didn't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. Cole looked at her, tears in his eyes. You're right, he whispered. And I made the wrong one. Diane pulled out her phone. Then make it right. Cole stared at the phone, then at her. If I go on record, they'll destroy me. If you don't, you'll destroy yourself. Cole closed his eyes. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he nodded. Okay, he whispered. I'll talk. Diane hit record. State your name and rank. Detective Raymond Cole, Millbrook Police Department. Tell me what really happened the night Brian Lawson died. Cole took a shaky breath, and then he told the truth. Cole's confession took 23 minutes. When it was over, he sat with his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. They're going to come after me, he said quietly. Let them, Diane replied. The truth is out now. The truth doesn't matter if... No one listens. They'll listen, Diane said. I'll make sure of it. Cole looked at her, his eyes red. You really believe that? I have to. He stood, wiping his face. Good luck, Ms. Mercer. You're gonna need it. He walked away, disappearing into the trees. Diane sat alone on the bench, the recording safely uploaded to 3 separate cloud servers. She had what she needed. Now she had to survive long enough to use it. That night, Diane returned to her motel, the original one. She knew it was a risk, but she wanted them to know she wasn't hiding. She was done running. She sat at the small desk, editing the footage, cutting together Cole's confession with the documents she'd found, the 911 call, the neighbor's audio recording. It was all there. A complete, undeniable picture of corruption. At 11:47 p.m., her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Ms. Mercer. The voice was smooth, cold. Gerald Whitmore. Senator, Diane said evenly, I'm calling as a courtesy, to give you one last chance to walk away. I'm not interested. You should be. You're playing a dangerous game, and you don't understand the rules. I understand them perfectly, Diane said. You killed a man's reputation to protect your own. You manipulated evidence, you framed a child, and you thought no one would ever find out. Whitmore was silent for a moment. Then he laughed. It was a low, chilling sound. You think this is about me? He said. This is bigger than me, bigger than you, bigger than that little girl. This is about order, control, making sure the right people stay in power. And who decides who the right people are? People like me, Whitmore said simply. People who understand that sometimes sacrifices have to be made for the greater good. Emma Calloway is not a sacrifice. She is if I say she is. Diane's grip tightened on the phone. You're not God. No, Whitmore said quietly. But in this town, I'm close enough. He paused. Last chance, Ms. Mercer. Drop this. Walk away. I'll make sure you're compensated. Generously. Go to hell, Whitmore sighed. I tried to be reasonable. The line went dead. Diane didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window watching the parking lot, her camera on the desk beside her. At 3:18 a.m., a black SUV pulled into the lot. Her heart raced. 2 men got out. Suits, sunglasses at 3 in the morning. They walked toward her room. Diane grabbed her laptop, her phone, and her camera and slipped out the back window. She ran. Behind her, she heard the motel room door crash open. She didn't look back. She reached her car, threw everything inside, and drove. She didn't stop until she was 2 states away. The next morning, Diane checked into a small inn in Virginia. She paid cash, used a burner phone, and stayed off the grid. She opened her laptop and uploaded Cole's confession to every major news outlet she could think of. Then she posted it online. YouTube, Twitter, Reddit, everywhere. Within 6 hours, it had 500,000 views. By the end of the day, it was trending nationwide. And a Justice for Emma news cruise descended on Millbrook. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, outside Whitmore's office, outside the police station. The story exploded. And this time, there was no burying it. Diane's phone buzzed. A text from Todd Brennan, the young reporter from the Gazette. They're calling for a federal investigation. Whitmore's office just released a statement denying everything. This is huge. Diane stared at the message, her chest tight. She'd done it. She'd exposed them, but she knew it wasn't over. People like Whitmore didn't go down easily, and they didn't forgive. Another text came through, this one from an unknown number. She opened it. A single photo. Her motel room, torn apart, furniture overturned, walls smashed, and written on the mirror in red paint. You should have listened. Diane's hand shook, but she didn't delete the photo. She forwarded it to the FBI. Then she got back to work, because Emma was still in custody, and the fight was just beginning. The call came at dawn. Ms. Mercer, this is Agent Susan Graves with the FBI. We've reviewed the materials you submitted. We'd like to meet. Diane exhaled. Finally. When? Today. Noon. Federal building in Harrisburg. Come alone. The meeting lasted 3 hours. Agent Graves was sharp, methodical, skeptical of everything. She made Diane walk through every piece of evidence, every source, every detail. When it was over, Graves leaned back. This is solid. We're opening an investigation into Senator Whitmore, Judge Hale, and the Millbrook Police Department. Diane felt a weight lift. What about Emma? We're filing an emergency motion to halt all proceedings pending review. She'll remain in protective custody, but the charges will be suspended. That's not enough, Diane said. She needs to go home. To her mother? The same mother Detective Cole says might have actually killed Brian Lawson? Diane froze. She'd been so focused on proving Emma was innocent, she hadn't stopped to ask the next question. If Emma didn't kill Brian, who did? Diane drove back to Millbrook that night. She had one more person to confront, Claire Calloway. Claire's house was dark when Diane arrived. No car in the driveway, no lights on inside. Diane knocked anyway. No answer. She tried the door. Unlocked. She stepped inside. Claire? Silence. Diane moved through the house, her pulse racing. The living room was untouched, the kitchen empty. Then she saw it. On the dining table, a single envelope. Diane's name written across the front. She opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. Ms. Mercer, by the Wa. Time you read this, I'll be gone. I'm sorry I couldn't be stronger. I'm sorry I let them use my daughter. You were right. Emma didn't kill Brian. I did. He was going to take her from me. He had the judge. He had Whitmore. He had everything. I had nothing. That night we fought. He told me if I didn't sign over custody, he'd make sure I never saw her again. He laughed, said no one would believe me. I grabbed the knife. I didn't plan it. I just snapped. Emma saw everything. She tried to stop me. That's why she had blood on her. She was trying to help him. I told her to say she did it. I thought they'd go easy on a child. I thought I could fix it later. I was wrong. Whitmore found out the truth. He said if I stayed quiet, he'd make sure Emma was taken care of. If I talked, we'd both go to prison. So, I stayed quiet. I let my baby take the blame. I'm a coward, and I can't live with that anymore. Please tell Emma I'm sorry. Tell her I loved her, even when I failed her. Claire Diane's hands shook. She pulled out her phone and called 911. I need police at 447 Maple Street. Possible suicide risk. A voice behind her. She's already gone. Diane spun. Senator Whitmore stood in the doorway, his expression calm. Claire left town 3 hours ago, he said, with a new identity and enough money to start over, far away from here. Diane stared at him, her blood boiling. You let her go. I gave her a choice, Whitmore said smoothly. Confess and destroy her daughter's life. Further, or disappear and let the system correct itself. She just confessed in writing. Whitmore smiled. Did she? I don't see a signature, no date. Could have been written by anyone. He stepped closer. The FBI can investigate all they want, but without Claire, without evidence, without a body, this all goes away. Diane's jaw clenched. Emma deserves the truth. Emma, Whitmore said coldly, deserves a future, which she'll have. The charges will be dropped. She'll be placed in a good home, and this nightmare will fade. Because you'll bury it. Because I'll manage it, Whitmore corrected. That's what people like me do. We clean up messes. He turned to leave, then paused. You did good work, Ms. Mercer. But don't mistake exposure for justice. The system bends. It doesn't break. He walked out. Diane stood alone, the letter still in her hand. The emergency hearing was set for Thursday morning. Diane spent the previous 2 days preparing. She compiled every piece of evidence, every recording, every document. She sent copies to the FBI, to Paul Garrett, to journalists across the country. If Whitmore thought he could bury this, he was wrong. The night before the hearing, Diane sat in a diner with her small crew, Todd Brennan and a videographer named Marcus, who'd volunteered to help document everything. This is it, Todd said quietly. Tomorrow, everything comes out. Diane nodded, but her stomach was tight. Claire's letter haunted her. The truth was messy, complicated. A mother who killed to protect her child. A system that weaponized that child to protect itself. And Emma, caught in the middle of it all. What if they don't care? Marcus asked. What if even with all this evidence nothing changes? Diane looked at him. Then we keep fighting. Todd raised his coffee cup. To the fight. They clinked cups, but the gesture felt hollow. Later that night, Diane returned to her motel room. She opened her laptop and recorded a message, a final insurance policy. She explained everything, the evidence, the threats, the cover-up. If something happened to her, the video would auto-upload in 24 hours. She titled it, The Truth About Emma Calloway. Then she closed the laptop and sat on the edge of the bed. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You've done enough. Walk away now or you won't walk away at all. The courtroom was chaos. People cheered. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Protesters outside erupted in celebration, their chants echoing through the building. But Diane didn't move. She sat in the back row, watching Emma's face on the screen. The little girl didn't smile, didn't react. She just stared, confused as the adults around her celebrated something she couldn't understand. Judge Hale banged her gavel repeatedly. Order! Order in this court! The noise subsided, but the tension remained thick in the air. Paul Garrett stood, his voice steady but emotional. Your Honor, we request immediate release of Emma Calloway into appropriate care, pending reunification proceedings. Agreed, Hale said curtly. The defendant is remanded to State Child Services until a suitable guardian is identified. This court is adjourned. She rose and left quickly, avoiding eye contact with anyone. D.A. Holden gathered his papers and walked out a side door without a word. Diane stayed seated, her mind racing. The charges were dropped. Emma was free, but no one had been held accountable. Outside the courthouse, Diane was swarmed by reporters. Ms. Mercer, what do you say to people calling you a hero? Did Senator Whitmore play a role in the cover-up? What happens to Emma now? Diane held up a hand and the crowd quieted. Emma Calloway is a 2-year-old child who survived something no child should ever endure. She was failed by the system that was supposed to protect her. Today, the charges were dropped, But that's not justice, that's damage control. She paused, choosing her words carefully. The real story isn't about Emma. It's about the people who tried to use her, who manipulated evidence, silenced witnesses, and turned a tragedy into a political tool. Some of those people are still in power, and until they're held accountable, nothing has really changed. A reporter called out, "Are you referring to Senator Whitmore?" Diane met the camera. "I'm referring to everyone who knew the truth and chose to bury it." 3 days later, the FBI announced its findings. Detective Raymond Cole was placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. 2 officers in the Millbrook Police Department were quietly reassigned. The district attorney's office released a statement citing procedural errors, but made no admissions of wrongdoing. Judge Margaret Hale recused herself from all future cases involving minors and announced her early retirement. Senator Gerald Whitmore held a press conference. Diane watched it from her motel room, her jaw clenched. Whitmore stood at a podium, flanked by lawyers, his expression somber but composed. "I want to address the recent allegations," he began. "Brian Lawson was a dear friend, a man who dedicated his life to serving this community. His death was a tragedy, and in the aftermath, mistakes were made. Not out of malice, but out of a desire to see justice served quickly." He paused, his voice dropping. "I deeply regret any role I may have played in the confusion surrounding this case. I have cooperated fully with federal investigators and will continue to do so. However, I want to be clear. I broke no laws. I violated no oaths. I simply tried to support a friend's family in their darkest hour." Reporter shouted, "Did you pressure police to alter evidence?" Whitmore's expression didn't change. "Absolutely not. And I resent the implication." Another reporter, "What about the loan you gave Brian Lawson?" "A personal loan to help a friend in need. Fully documented. Fully legal." "Why did you visit Claire Calloway after Brian's death?" "To offer my condolences, nothing more." Diane turned off the TV, her stomach churning. He was untouchable. A week later, Diane received a call from Paul Garrett. "They found Claire," he said. Diane's breath caught. "Where?" "Canada." She turned herself in. "To the U.S. consulate in Toronto. She's being extradited." Diane closed her eyes. "Is she talking?" "She confessed everything. On record. Signed affidavit. She corroborated Detective Cole's statement. Said Whitmore knew the truth from the beginning and threatened to take Emma if she didn't stay." "Silent. Will they charge him?" Paul hesitated. "The FBI says there's not enough direct evidence to prove coercion. It's her word against his, and he's got an army of lawyers. So he walks." "Probably," Paul admitted. "But Claire's confession clears Emma completely. The media narrative has shifted. People know what really happened now." "That's not enough." "Maybe not," Paul said quietly. "But it's something." Emma was placed in foster care with a family 2 hours outside Millbrook. Diane visited her once, bringing a stuffed rabbit, a new one, soft and clean. Emma took it silently, clutching it to her chest. She didn't speak much. The trauma counselor said it would take time, maybe years. Diane knelt down to Emma's level. "You're safe now. You know that, right?" Emma stared at her with those wide, hollow eyes. "Mama's gone," she whispered. "I know, sweetie, but she loved you. She made mistakes, but she loved you." Emma looked down at the rabbit. "Did I do something bad?" Diane's throat tightened. "No, honey. You didn't do anything bad. You were just a little girl caught in a bad situation. None of this was your fault." Emma nodded, but Diane could see she didn't believe. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." 6 months later, Claire Calloway pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter. She was sentenced to 12 years in prison. Senator Gerald Whitmore was re-elected by a narrow margin. The FBI closed its investigation, citing insufficient evidence of criminal wrongdoing. Judge Margaret Hale quietly retired to Florida. Detective Raymond Cole resigned from the force and moved out of state. DA Marcus Holden lost his bid for state senate, and returned to private practice. And Emma Calloway remained in foster care, her mother's parental rights terminated. Diane sat in her small apartment, editing the final cut of her documentary. It was called The Truth Buried. It laid out everything: the corruption, the manipulation, the people who escaped justice. She uploaded it to every platform she could find. Within 24 hours, it had 5 million views. Within a week, it sparked protests in 3 states. But Diane knew the truth. Real change was slow, painful, incomplete. The system had bent, just like Whitmore said it would. It hadn't broken, but cracks had formed. And through those cracks, a little bit of light had gotten in. On a quiet Sunday morning, Diane received an email from Emma's foster mother. It included a video. Diane clicked play. Emma sat in a backyard, holding the stuffed rabbit. The sun was shining. Birds were singing. And for the first time in months, Emma smiled. It was small, fragile, uncertain, but it was real. Diane watched the video. 3 times, tears streaming down her face. Emma would carry the scars of this for the rest of her life. But she was alive. She was free. And maybe, someday, she'd understand that none of it was her fault. Diane closed her laptop and looked out the window. The fight wasn't over. It never really was. But for today, a little girl was smiling, and that was enough.